Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Where No One Has Gone Before, which is episode 5 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the episode Where No One Has Gone Before. So, Where No One Has Gone Before is the episode in which a Starfleet engineer comes aboard to test the Enterprise's warp engines, but however, his work seems like nonsense. However, he's also accompanied by a mysterious alien assistant, and when they do the experiments, they end up going 2 galaxies over and just a couple of minutes, which seems nearly impossible. The engineer, of course, takes credit for this, but Wesley is aware as he was looking at the assistant that it's the alien assistant who's responsible for this, so they try to get back home. However, they end up in a strange place where their thoughts become reality, and at this point they realize that it was the assistant who refers to himself as the Traveler who was responsible for this, but however he's becoming weak and dying, and so they have to help support him with positive thoughts, and he helps take the ship back home. So this is known, regarded by many as one of the best episodes of the first season, and one of the first actually good episode. And I don't disagree. So the first season is not very good, as I've been covering, and in fact, I think it's kind of worse than what I had thought it was, although I do think it gets better towards the end. But yes, just watching the episodes just now, going through them in order, this is the first one that I didn't think was bad. Now, that being said, it definitely does seem really good compared to the episodes of the first season I have seen so far, but that being said, it's not that good compared to what Next Generation does in the future, in future seasons 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So, it's not one of the best episodes of the show by any means at all. And I don't think it's necessarily, I wouldn't call it my favorite episode of season 1 even, as I think season 1 gets a bit better later on. But it's definitely the best episode in this first half of season 1, which is not very good, because it is interesting. It does have the cheesy element for sure, but it's not as cheesy. It's definitely not as cheesy as Code of Honor. Don't get me started on that. It's not as cheesy as Last Outpost with the Ferengi going and it doesn't have the BS bullshit of Gropper Zorn and the stupid reveal the jellyfish aliens that Encounter at Freud Point did. So, and then there's the episodes that come after this, which I would still say are more silly. Now, granted, the character of Krasinski, who is the engineer doing the tests on the engines, is really annoying. That he's like super arrogant to an absurd, almost dare I say, cartoonish degree. But, that is annoying, and that does bring this episode down a bit, and it's part of why I wouldn't consider this one of the best episodes of the show, but it's not that bad. It's certainly not as annoying as, the hyperactive, ridiculous Ferengi or some of the other bullshit that season 1 does. In comparison, yeah, I'll take the annoying, arrogant engineer over most of the other bullshit that season 1 does, especially the first half of season 1. But yeah, that is to say, so it's definitely one of the best it is the best of the first half of season 1. It's one of the best of the first season, but it's still not that good because season 1 as a whole is not that good. So, one thing I wanted to mention is that I saw this episode in the theaters. It was around 10 years ago, or maybe over 10 years by now. Time flies. Anyway, yeah, it was definitely over 10 years ago. I saw this in the theater when season 1 of Next Generation was first released on Blu-ray. And so they had like special showings in select theaters in the U.S. of this episode and the episode Data Lore, which I actually think this episode's better than Data Lore. I have my issues with Data Lore, but I'll get to that. And I was living in New Zealand at the time, so when I heard about it, I said, well, this is in the U.S. But just so happens I was planning on traveling to the U.S. at the time of this screening, and it just so happened that I would be in San Francisco, one of the cities that the screening was taking place in. At the time the screening was taking place. So I was like, I convinced my parents who I was visiting, hey, why don't we go out to the movie theater and see a couple episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. They enjoy Star Trek Next Generation as well, so we did that. It was fun. They had it was interesting seeing this in the theater and the sort of theater experience and the crowd reaction and stuff like that. They showed a couple of Blu-ray extras like in between the two episodes, and of course they kept showing an ad for the Blu-rays over and over again, but fair enough on that. But yeah, it was interesting seeing this in the theater. Now it's interesting they selected this in Data Lore as to show for season 1, because it's, would be for season 1 because it was the season 1 Blu-ray that they were celebrating. I wouldn't call those the best 2 episodes of the season. I would probably go with something more like Symbiosis and Conspiracy for the 2 best of the season, although maybe even Skin of Evil. But but those aren't very popular episodes. And also, this is more of, these 2 episodes are more of the crowd pleasers, the sort of fun adventure episodes that you can show in the movie theater, I guess. So I mean, it makes sense to me. So now let me talk about The Traveler, and I have a lot to say about The Traveler. So The Traveler is very interesting as portrayed in this episode, a alien from now it's interesting because when Riker first sees him, he says, "You're from Tal Alpha C, aren't you?" Now at first I was thinking, so these aliens are so common that he's able to recognize instantly as soon as he sees them where he's from. But then I realized, because that wouldn't make any sense, because they sort of act like they've never seen these aliens before, and they act like they live in a different reality. And so that doesn't make much sense. But then I realized it's like, it's not, he didn't say that because he recognized their species. More of, I think he read the reports. And in the report it said that Krasinski's alien assistant was from Tal Alpha C, and he looked up where it was. It was the outer reaches of known space, or whatever. So, yeah. So that's okay. Then that jives. And he refers to himself as a traveler, and because at first he says that his name is unpronounceable by humans, which is pretentious but fair. But he never calls himself the Traveler. That's something that the production made up later on, because they didn't really have a name for him. They couldn't just call him a Traveler, so they call him the Traveler. But anyway, so he's like a really nice guy, and he's a nice alien. He makes it clear he means no one any harm, and he sent them to these places on accident. And he's like really supportive of Wesley, and supportive of the Krasinski guy, even though he's an arrogant dickhead. So he's definitely like one of the more benign aliens the Enterprise crew met, and seems like a swell guy. Alright, so couple of different avenues I want to go down regarding the Traveler. Let me start with what they do with him in the future, and I'll get into some spoilers for the rest for season 7 of Next Generation, which I'm sure you've seen. But there are also spoilers from Picard season 2, which perhaps you haven't seen, and if you haven't seen it, don't bother. It's terrible. Anyway, so in Picard season 2 recently, they completely retcon the Travelers to say that the Travelers are a group of like police that police time and space to make sure no one interferes, and that maintains the fabric of reality. And Wesley Crusher became a Traveler and recruited what's her face, the character I don't really care about, in season 2 of Picard to become a Traveler, which this scene was out of nowhere, had nothing to do with anything. And apparently they were also responsible for Gary 7 in the episode Assignment Earth, and then they introduced like one of Laris's ancestors in Picard season 2 is also that same group, and the Travelers apparently are the ones who employ these agents who they send on missions to make sure that the timeline is maintained. Needless to say, this is a huge retcon and a very bad one. And again, I did a video once saying the top 10 worst retcons of Star Trek, and I specified that not all retcons are necessarily bad. There are benign retcons, and there actually are some good retcons, stuff that should have been retconned. But I think the majority of retcons are bad, because retconning is something that you shouldn't really do unless it's like totally necessary. So it's a rare sort of thing you should do, but this is stupid, quite frankly, and it goes against everything that was established in this episode. However, I'm going to make a bold statement here and say the retconning of the Travelers they did in Picard season 2 actually was not as bad as the retconning they did in the season 7 episode Journey's End. I think that was a worse retcon, and I think the Picard season 2 was just building off of that retcon. Because and people may disagree with me, but that Journey's End retcon annoys me a hell of a lot more, and I'll get to that when I cover Journey's End eventually. But in that episode, the Traveler appears and tells Wesley that he's destined to become another Traveler like him, and he's going to take him through the realities of time and space, and Wesley's going to be, because Wesley's able to freeze time, and he's able to control time and space and stuff. And they even like reference this episode where the Traveler told Picard that Wesley was very special, and so Wesley goes off to become a Traveler. That actually goes totally against the spirit of what was portrayed here. Here, the Traveler sort of definitely makes it clear that Wesley's sort of a genius when it comes to, quantum mechanics and stuff like that, but tells Picard to guide him. And I don't know, to me it's heavily implied like this was basically the show's excuse to put Wesley on the bridge. Essentially that's what it was. And because it would seem ridiculous to have a 14-year-old boy on their bridge, and it is. And so they come up with this excuse of this alien being telling the captain, oh no, he's like a genius, he's like super special with like time and space, so definitely put him on the bridge so he can be part of the crew, the main cast of the show. Essentially, but however, like in universe, I take that to mean that he's going to just be a very special human, and the Traveler even makes it clear that he's just observing humanity, and he's a friend, and he wants humans to proceed as normal. So, in fact, he's very careful about not interfering Like he tells Wesley, I don't want to, or others, that he doesn't want to interfere with Wesley's natural development. So he tells Picard specifically that you can help guide him without interfering, which is something the Traveler said he couldn't do, i.e., take him out of existence and have him freeze time and then take him off to a magical realm to become a traveler. That is the very definition of interfering, and so I think that retcon is worse than the Picard Season 2 retcon, and to be fair to the Picard Season 2, which was a horrible, horrible season, but to be fair to it anyway, it was just building off of the retcon that already exists in Journey's End. Yeah. And so I don't like it, and I think it violates what this episode was trying to do. But again, this episode was just an excuse for them to make Wesley a main character anyway. But okay, so the other avenue I want to go with the Traveler is that he is very reminiscent of a lot of popular New Age beliefs. And I think this is Gene Roddenberry and Nigel Barrett's influence. They've been known, I believe, to have very strong New Age beliefs, and he did definitely incorporate a lot of them into Next Generation. In fact, when I saw this in the movie theater, even though I had seen this episode billions of times since I was like 12 years old, but it had been a while since I've seen it like as an adult, and watching it in the theaters like that, it was when it really, really struck me, and it really, really, really hit me that this is basically just regurgitating a lot of New Age beliefs regarding the power of thought over time and space, and how they're all connected, and it gets into metaphysics and stuff like that. And that really hit me, like whenever the Traveler was talking in this episode, that's basically them, like Gene Roddenberry sliding his New Age beliefs into the episode, which, I'll give my personal opinion on New Age beliefs. I kind of dabbled in New Age beliefs a little bit. That is to say, when I was a teenager, I dated a girl who was into New Age beliefs. And my mother was a little bit into them, although she more considered herself, when I was younger, a Roman Catholic, and forced me to go to church, and that's a whole nother ball of wax I could get into. But when I was an older teenager, she got more into these New Age beliefs, so I personally thought that was an improvement. Now, as I mentioned before in my channel, I consider myself an agnostic atheist. However, I've seen like other atheists like who really, really like hardcore like attack New Age beliefs and consider them nonsense, and write essays and videos just attacking how stupid and ridiculous and nonsensical they are. And I'm not on board with that. Not to say I necessarily disagree with their conclusions. I kind of don't. Because I don't believe these New Age beliefs. I'm not into these New Age beliefs. I just tolerate them, or more accepting of them than I am of mainstream religious beliefs, which is why I don't like I don't really support when these atheists attack these beliefs, because I think it's more important to attack mainstream religious beliefs like Catholicism, Judaism, Islam, any of those like mainstream things. I think personally are just as ridiculous, and actually are, because the fact that they're more widely spread, it's more important to go after them than fringe beliefs. But also, the main point I would say is I think people are free to believe whatever they want to believe. My issue with religion doesn't come when it comes to specific beliefs. It comes to more of the effects it has on society. It has more to do with religion's usually negative influence on society norms and governments, particularly when it comes to propping up bigotry or yeah, bigotry or going after people's personal beliefs and stuff like that. And so that's more my issue, not what they believe. What they believe, I don't really care. Which is why and if you haven't you heard the phrase agnostic atheist before. I've met some people who say agnosticism and atheism are like two totally rigid and separate things, which I disagree. And because I I consider myself sort of both in a way, because I'm an atheist in terms of my personal beliefs is I don't believe there is a Yahweh or a specific God. Like, I believe they flat out do not exist, which is an atheist belief. But I'm more agnostic, whereas I'm not necessarily against the concept of there being a creator overall, someone who, or like life after death or stuff like this. I'm very agnostic about that. Maybe so, maybe not. I don't know. Nobody knows, and that's my whole point. I like what, even though I hate Bill Maher now, but I like what he said once when talking about his atheism, is that he preaches the church of I don't know, which is exactly what. But I distance myself from atheism because, and well, not totally, as I said, I do consider myself an atheist in some regards. It's just in other regards they seem to be totally like against, like as I said, attacking all these new age beliefs about thought and energy and all that having to do with affecting time and space and stuff like that, which I'm open to. I'm more agnostic about that. And also afterlife, not all atheists, but some are totally against that concept and say when you die, that's it, like they know. But to me, that is just as bad as saying you go to heaven, because nobody knows, and that's the whole point. I preach the church of I don't know. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent on my own personal beliefs. Point is, this reminded me a lot of this documentary I saw in the early 2000s called What the Bleep Do We Know, which was created by a lot of new age people who believe in all these new age beliefs, and they were sort of propping up their beliefs. And I just watched a video from someone who's scientifically minded. I was going to say an atheist, but I actually don't know if he's an atheist or not, and that's actually irrelevant. Point is, he was scientifically minded, and he was completely destroying and trashing that documentary, and trashing it as a bunch of big ball of nonsense. But the documentary itself, like, I remember when I saw that in the theaters in the early 2000s, I was like, hey, it's The Traveler. Like, they're believing, basically supporting the same thing that The Traveler is doing, and what's portrayed in this episode when they go into that strange realm where, thoughts become reality, that, because the film itself was saying that your thoughts are more powerful than anything, and they can actually form reality if you're focused. And you could couple this with practices like yoga and meditation that focus the mind, and saying that if you're thinking negatively, then bad things are more likely to happen to you, and if you're thinking positively, good things are more likely to happen, and more complex and complicated than that. And that's essentially what The Traveler is kind of getting at. That not the good things will happen to you if you think happily, but I guess that's kind of implied though. But more of that thoughts control time and space, and the concepts of between thought, matter, and energy, and what the time and space are not rigid and separate ideas that humans believe them to be, which is totally goes in line with a lot of these new age beliefs. And I don't necessarily disagree with those, but, I don't agree either. But I find it interesting in fiction. It's definitely an interesting concept to explore, because I don't have to completely agree with there's a lot of science fiction that I love that I think is total bullshit and couldn't really happen. Like, I'm trying to think, but there was a movie that brought up the concept of I can't remember what the movie was, but it brought up the concept of reincarnation. I thought it was a great movie and I loved it, but I totally do not believe in reincarnation. I think that's nonsense. So, but it's an entertaining movie, and you don't have to be totally on board with a specific thing to, enjoy a fictional depiction of it. So I think it is an interesting avenue to explore in fiction, and how they're able to sort of travel through two different universes and whatnot. So talking about the space, the weird space that the Enterprise D finds himself in, that thoughts start to become reality. Picard sees his mother, more on that later. He sees himself when he exits the turbolift. He's like in the middle of subspace, and then Worf sees his Targ. Tasha Yar sees the rape gangs, and don't get me started on the whole concept of rape gangs. Like, don't even call it that. Like, that's anyway cringy. But anyway, and then they were showing this random ensign playing with all these like classic composers or whatever who, for no reason, and this other ensign was like a ballerina, and this one dude had like this fire that he had to put out with his mind or whatever. But yeah, so this reminded me of several episodes like what was the one from DS9 that really sucked? If Wishes Were Horses, which is more, I guess it was more specifically imagination, what they said, where this is more of like your thoughts becoming reality. And also, I guess a bit like Shorely from the original series, but that was like there was someone who was creating mechanical things to bring your reality to life, and plus that episode sucks. Well, so is the one from Deep Space Nine, and I guess my point is, and I thought there was one in Modern Track too that was like this, and I compared it to, but I can't think of it at the time. But point is, I think this is the best one of those, because I think the other ones are not good, and I like this one. I think the way it's portrayed here, it ties into the whole traveler's philosophy. And it was like the scenes were actually cool, seeing like Picard open the turbo lift and it be like subspace. Like, that was scary, that was cool. And then the way they slowly start to do it, and they slowly start to realize that something's wrong, something's going on. They realize that they need to get the hell out of there before they can't even distinguish between the thoughts and reality. And the traveler himself said that they're way too soon for their evolution to be here, because they don't have full control over their thoughts yet, so it would be too chaotic an existence for them. And I also like how the traveler says that, I'm not necessarily from another time as you understand time. Again, that's getting into the concept that he's really more evolved than human beings, and that he has a better grip on things like time and reality, and that's something that humanity, even in the 24th century, doesn't fully grasp, which is, again, a very interesting concept to explore in fiction. I'm all for it. And so overall, I think it makes this whole different reality where people's thoughts come to life actually really good, and definitely much better than those other two examples, which I think are not good at all, personally. Anyway, so Picard sees his mother, and for the longest time I thought it was his grandmother, but I just found out recently, after Picard Season 2 aired, that it was supposed to be his mother. Now, let's get into Picard Season 2 again, and again, spoilers from that dumpster fire, which if you haven't seen yet, you should never see anyway, but I'll give the spoiler warning first anyway. So, Picard's mother appears and is talking, really old, gray hair, and drinking some tea and sort of giving him some philosophical advice on where they're at. And then in Picard Season 2, retcons it to say that Picard's mother had a mental illness and killed herself when Picard was a little boy. Therefore, she never grew old, and he never knew someone like this. Now, the writers of Picard season 2 was aware of the inconsistency, and they tried to come up with this bullshit line to try to explain it away, where they had Picard say, "Oh, I used to imagine my mother as an old woman who would give me tea." To try to explain away with her appearance in this episode, because it wasn't really, because he used to imagine his mother being old. You see, that's why he sees his mother here, and because he used to imagine that she was old. Bullshit! The way he reacts in this episode when he sees her, he makes it very clear that he thinks that the only thing that's weird about her being there is that, well, other than the fact they're in the other side of the galaxy or whatever, but the main thing that's weird about her being there is that she's dead. Not that, oh, you were never an old woman. And the way he reacts to her makes it very clear that she does appear as he knew her. Not as he imagined her, because she died when he was really a young boy. That's bullshit. It's a retcon bullshit, and that line is an insult to my intelligence. Just saying. Anyway, we get another random chief engineer. I think he's going to appear in another episode too. And in fact, in this episode, Riker says that he's one of our chief engineers. Isn't the whole definition of chief meaning they're the one in charge, so you can't have multiple chief engineers? Oh, that's season 1 for you. It is so annoying. Just like Krasinski. Anyway, I think that's all I gotta say about this episode. So let me move on to my Patreon supporters who support the channel. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. It really helps me continue, and it really helps the channel continue, and it's very much appreciated. So we have Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manigester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Ricky, who says, "Finally we get to a good episode in this crap season. Although I wouldn't consider this as one of the best of TNG, or wouldn't even put it in the top 50. It is still a decent episode. The premise and concept of this episode was actually quite interesting and engaging. I really liked that the Enterprise was thrown 3 galaxies away from their position, and that all the crewmen had so many visions that felt very real. Also liked the Traveler character as he is quite interesting. However, I didn't like the whole Wesley Crusher, so special that so had to train him. Especially knowing the outcome of Wesley, I find it pointless, and the dude leading the experiment was very rude, unlikable, and unreasonable. The interactions were also very cheesy, not as good as later seasons will be. Overall, a decent episode of the first season, so my rating is a 7 out of 10. One thing I did forget to mention was that this was kind of, I think, the original concept of like Voyager, like the show Voyager was kind of based off this concept, and that's what I'm reminded of every time I watch it, when they're throwing several galaxies away and they're stuck there and they're like, will we ever get home? And of course they do get home by the end of the episode, but I think when they're coming up with the premise of Voyager, they said that they didn't name this episode specifically, but they did say like, oh, this crew, whenever our crew goes and gets stuck somewhere and wonder if they ever can get home, we thought, well, what if they don't get home? What if they remain stuck there? And of course Voyager changed it to make it more reasonable, where they were just in the Delta Quadrant, not 2 galaxies away, because as Data said, that would take 300 years to get back from. So Yeah, it was more of an achievable goal for Voyager. But anyway, next comment is from Matty Jester. He says, I think this episode isn't too bad, especially for season 1, but it's nothing special. I like the plot of the Enterprise being flung far and then further still into space with appropriate funky special effects. Krasinski was irritating, and I suggest to imagine he would thrive in Starfleet. No one would want him on their ship. I struggle to imagine he would thrive in Starfleet. No one would want them on their ship. Also, no Wesley Crusher hater, but his storyline with the Traveler and his leaving the show ultimately gets a big shrug from me. It's not that interesting. Seeing the Traveler again, I don't see how he has any connections to the supervisor of TOS. That's just not the vibe I get from him. Would he really be interested in Picard's depressed astronaut ancestor or whatever? Nah. If this episode was later in the show, I'd rate it lower, but for early TNG, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Yeah, you don't see the connection between the Traveler and the supervisors like Gary Seven from TOS because there is none. It's a bullshit retcon. But anyway. Next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells. Where no one has gone before. A lot of people like this episode, but I just find it annoying. Krasinski's anxious, I'm trying to take a shit expression, and his arrogance are grating. His why is this child here question is valid, since not too many episodes ago Wesley took control of the ship. I would have liked to get to know the Traveler a bit better, but since he was wearing pajamas, I'm afraid of waking him up. I enjoyed the 2001 Space Odyssey visual effects, and it's nice to see that Picard's mother wears clothes from the 19th century just like his family in the Nexus. Whose idea was that horrible sweater of Wesley's, though? It's hilarious that the Enterprise D goes faster and further in this episode than Voyager does in 7 seasons. I'm feeling generous, so I'll give this one 6 Klingon Targs out of 10. Yeah, so my rating for this episode out of 10 is going to be a 7, very good. I actually keep going back and forth between a 6 and a 7. I think the last time I watched this episode I gave it a 6. But now, I like Brandon, I'm feeling generous. I'm going to give it a 7, mainly because I see how much better it is than the rest of Season 1 I had to endure so far. It's refreshing, because it's an interesting concept. The Traveler is an interesting concept. I think the actor who plays him does a really good job. I think this is a really interesting episode. I think I'll go 7, because I always brought a sense of wonder to me to see them go the distance of 2 galaxies over within just a couple minutes, and then that stuff they did where their thoughts were becoming reality. As I said, I think it's the best that Star Trek ever handled that concept. And yeah, they just found a way to sneak in Roddenberry's New Age beliefs into this episode with the Traveler, but I think that is an interesting concept to explore in fiction. So, that is it for my review of Where No One Has Gone Before. So, coming up next on my channel, let me just see here. So, next Monday will be my review for Lonely Among Us. And then Thursday, I'll be covering the next episode of Strange New Worlds. Saturday, covering the episode Justice. And then Monday, covering the Next Generation episode The Battle. So that is what is coming up on my channel. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.